Other developments on our continent now, and despite many warnings that a man-made famine is now being felt in parts of Sudan, there's still nowhere near enough food getting through to people there. They've been forced from their homes by the civil war. The Sudanese military and the Rapid Support Forces are fighting for control of the country. Now the Norwegian Refugee Council says it's been able to get some food aid to a camp in the north of the country for the first time in several months. Mathilde is the advocacy manager for the Norwegian Refugee Council. Mathilde, good afternoon to you. What situation are people living in? How bad is it in these camps?
The situation is terrible. You were mentioning Zamzam camp, which is one of the largest displacement camp in the country in North Darfur. This is a camp that has basically been confirmed with a famine. It was very significant to have a famine because there's only been very few famine over this past decade around the world. And now we have one in this camp that is hosting 500,000 people. What you have to also imagine is that this camp has been cut off assistance for more than 6 months now because there's been basically a siege done by the Rapid Support Force around the camp and around the nearest city, Al-Fashir. So this distribution of food that we did a few months back now was very small compared to the needs. And now we know that trucks are coming to Al-Fashir 6 months, it's almost 6 months late now. But it's too late now to revert the famine. What we can only do is trying to limit the number of deaths basically happening.
So just to be clear, are the Rapid Support Forces deliberately stopping food from getting in?
There's been an ongoing siege, yes, on the city of Al-Fashir and the nearby camp of Zamzam for at least since April this year. There's been, this war is also using basically hungry belly as a weapon, right? There's been, since the beginning of the war, complete destruction of markets, of farmlands, of shops, of the banking system, etc. Livelihood were torched down. There is really the conduct of hostility in Sudan has created what we call this man-made starvation. And on top of this, obviously, it has displaced so many people who right now do not have, a job to actually pay for food. And so the last thing that the warring parties are doing is also not allowing assistance to reach the people. And so therefore, maintaining them in a place of hunger.
This must mean that thousands of children are literally starving to death. In the year 2024, children deliberately are not getting enough food.
Absolutely. I remember one of my colleagues telling me in one of the places in Kordofan, lifting a kid who was, I think, 3 years old and being shocked by how light this kid was, I know this is not a doctor measure, but, it can tell you how terrifying it looks when you have a kid that is just so light. When you see kids who just eat basically boiled leaves because their mother and parents cannot afford to buy food. And we do see children dying of hunger across Sudan, and we see children dying of bullets across Sudan. And I have to say that if it's not a bullet, it's almost always either hunger or, a disease that is related to hunger that is killing those children.
We've seen the United Nations, we've seen other institutions, they've all been making this warning. You're making this warning too. You and your organization have been there. But, we really need the whole world to get involved in this. And I sometimes think that, people are too busy focusing on Russia and Ukraine and the Middle East. They're not getting involved in Sudan.
You're pointing out something very important. Yes, there's been warning, but warning haven't, led to action. I think it's quite shocking to see how paralyzed and how unpreoccupied the leaders of this world are for Sudan. We're talking about the largest displacement crisis in the world, one of the largest hunger crises in the world. It's a crisis that that starts at the Red Sea and it finishes in the Sahel with all, the refugees across. And yet, no head of states at very high level has, put their foot on Sudan and said, okay, I will convene at very high level a diplomatic, initiative to press the warring parties to end this senseless violence. And the contrast, as you said, between this tragedy and the other tragedies in the world, like Ukraine or Gaza, is quite startling. we shouldn't have crises competing with each other to get attention. And the world is yet to wake up when it comes to Sudan.
I mean, our country, South Africa, we have a reputation for being able to broker peace, for working to broker peace, particularly in Africa. I mean, our former president, Jacob Zuma, a very controversial man here, but he played an important role in bringing peace for a while in the DRC. Should our current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, be doing something in Sudan? He's said that he's worried about it. Do we need him to be active there?
We definitely need a head of states of the continent to really come together and, press on the warring parties to stop this war. And not only that, I think that, this focus on peace is obviously needed, but what we know right now is that the warring parties are not ready to sit down at the table of discussion, and they're vying for a military victory. So you also have to have intermediary measures at the moment, intermediary focus. And one of them is making sure that the food and the aid is actually reaching people. And that doesn't seem to move any of the world leaders, this question of humanitarian access and the question of people dying of hunger. So I agree with you. South Africa, just like any other African country, should step in. There is also a lot to be done by the head of states in the Gulf who have a responsibility over this war. And right now, we're just not seeing it happening.
Mathilde, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate that. An important reminder of the people, the children who are dying on our continent as a result of this war. Mathilde is the Advocacy Manager at the Norwegian Refugee Council.